The thunderous crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, sending Rosalie Bennett diving behind an overturned wagon as splinters erupted from the wooden boards above her head. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the taste of dirt and fear coating her tongue as she pressed herself against the ground. She'd been in town less than an hour, and already someone was trying to kill her. "You can't hide forever, Miss Bennett," a gruff voice called out. "Mr. Holloway sends his regards." Rosalie's fingers curled around the small derringer in her pocket, her father's last gift to her, before Holloway's men had taken everything else. 2 bullets. That was all she had against the 3 men currently hunting her through the streets of this God-forsaken town. "I reckon that's enough." A deep, unfamiliar voice drawled from somewhere to her left. 3 rapid shots rang out in succession, followed by the sound of bodies hitting dirt. Rosalie held her breath, listening for footsteps approaching her hiding spot. "They're down, madam," the voice called out. "You can come out now. I ain't looking to harm you." "And why should I believe you?" Rosalie called back, her finger tightening on the trigger of her small pistol. A moment passed before a pair of worn leather boots appeared at the edge of her vision. Rosalie looked up to see a tall man silhouetted against the setting sun, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Because if I wanted you dead," he said calmly, "you already would be." The man holstered his revolver and extended a hand toward her. His face came into view as he tilted his head weathered by sun and wind, with sharp features softened only by a pair of striking blue eyes. "Name's Wade Blackwood," he said, "and you look like you could use a friend in these parts." Rosalie ignored his outstretched hand and pushed herself to her feet, keeping her derringer aimed squarely at his chest. "I don't need friends," she said coldly. "I can't trust anyone." The corner of Wade's mouth lifted in what might have been a smile as he lowered his hand. "Start with me." Wyoming Territory, 1878. Those 3 words marked the beginning of Rosalie Bennett's journey west, a journey that had brought her nothing but heartache and betrayal. Her father's ranch outside Cheyenne had been her home for 23 years, until Thomas Holloway decided he wanted the land for himself. What followed was a nightmare of false accusations, a crooked judge, and her father's body swinging from a tree while she watched from hiding. Now, 2 months later, she stood in a town she'd never heard of, facing a man who'd just saved her life, unable to decide if he was her salvation or merely the next in a long line of deceivers. "Those men," Wade continued when she remained silent, "they work for Holloway." "Been trailing you since Laramie, I reckon." Rosalie's eyes narrowed. "And how would you know that?" "Because I've been trailing them." Wade glanced toward the 3 bodies now drawing a crowd in the street. "Best we move along before the sheriff shows. He's in Holloway's pocket too." Rosalie felt her grip on the derringer waver. "Why would you help me? What's in it for you? Your father was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened to him." The mention of her father sent a jolt through Rosalie's body. "You knew him," Wade nodded once, "served with him during the war." "When I heard what happened." He paused, something dark passing over his features. "Let's just say we've got common cause against Holloway." The sound of raised voices and approaching footsteps cut their conversation short. Wade turned his head slightly, then looked back at Rosalie with newfound urgency. "Time's up. You coming or not?" Rosalie hesitated, her mind racing. This man could be leading her into another trap, but staying meant certain capture or worse. The devil she knew versus the devil she didn't. "Fine," she said at last, lowering her derringer but keeping it in hand. "But don't think for a second I trust you." Wade's expression remained impassive as he gestured toward the alley behind them. "Wouldn't dream of it." They slipped away just as the sheriff and his deputies rounded the corner, moving swiftly through back alleys until they reached the edge of town where 2 horses waited, tethered to a post outside a dilapidated barn. "The bay's yours," Wade said, untying both animals. "Name's Copper. He's steady and fast when he needs to be." Rosalie approached the horse cautiously. "How do you know I can ride?" Bennett's daughter. "I'd be surprised if you couldn't outride half the men in the territory." There was something like respect in his voice as he swung himself into his saddle. Despite herself, Rosalie felt a flicker of pride at his words. She mounted the bay gelding with practiced ease, settling into the saddle and gathering the reins. "Where are we headed?" she asked, Wade turned his horse northwest toward the distant mountains. "Somewhere Holloway's men won't follow easily. I've got a cabin up in the high country." And after that, his blue eyes met hers, serious and determined. "After that, we make Holloway pay for what he's done." They rode hard for hours, putting distance between themselves and Silver Creek. The landscape changed gradually around them, flat plains giving way to rolling hills and finally the foothills of the mountains. Rosalie kept a wary eye on her companion, studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. Wade Blackwood rode like a man born to the saddle, his movements fluid and natural. The revolver at his hip wasn't his only weapon. She'd spotted a Winchester rifle in his saddle scabbard and suspected he carried a knife somewhere on his person. His clothes were trail-worn but well-maintained: dark trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest beneath a long duster. The hat that shadowed his face was battered from years of use. Everything about him spoke of a man accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life. Whether that made him more or less trustworthy, Rosalie couldn't decide. As dusk settled over the land, Wade finally slowed their pace and led them toward a stand of cottonwoods nestled alongside a creek. "We'll rest here for the night," he said, dismounting. "Cabin's still half a day's ride." No sense pushing the horses in the dark. Rosalie slid from her saddle, her muscles protesting after the long ride. She watched as Wade efficiently set about making camp, gathering wood for a small fire and unpacking provisions from his saddlebags. "You hungry?" he asked, offering her a piece of jerky and a biscuit. She accepted the food without a word, settling on a fallen log across from him. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the small fire and the occasional stamp of the horses. "How did you find me?" Rosalie finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Wade chewed thoughtfully before answering. "Wasn't looking for you specifically, was tracking Holloway's men. When I realized they were after Bennett's daughter," he shrugged. "Figured I owed it to your father to step in." "You still haven't told me how you knew my father." "Like I said, we served together. 2nd Colorado Cavalry." Wade's expression softened slightly with memory. "He saved my life at Westport, carried me 3 miles to a field hospital after I took a bullet to the leg." Rosalie studied him in the firelight, looking for any sign of deception. "He never mentioned you." "No reason he should have. War was something most men tried to forget." Wade poked at the fire with a stick. "Ran into him again about 5 years back. I was passing through Cheyenne, heard there was a Bennett running a ranch outside town, stopped by to pay my respects. I don't remember any visitors from 5 years ago. You weren't there. Your father said you were back east, at some finishing school your mother had insisted on." The detail rang true. Rosalie had spent 2 miserable years at Mrs. Harrington's school for young ladies in Boston, returning home in the summer of '73 determined never to leave Wyoming again. "He spoke highly of you," Wade continued. "Said you had your mother's looks but his stubborn spirit." A lump formed in Rosalie's throat at the mention of her parents. Her mother had died of influenza when Rosalie was 16, leaving her and her father to run the ranch together. "Holloway came after our land 6 months ago," she said quietly. "Claimed my father had never properly filed the deed. When that didn't work, he accused him of stealing cattle." Her hands clenched into fists. "The trial was a sham. Judge Wilkins was in Holloway's pocket from the start." Wade nodded grimly. "Holloway's been gobbling up land all through the territory. Anyone who stands in his way ends up dead or driven out." "Why help me, really?" Rosalie pressed. "Gratitude to my father only goes so far." For a long moment Wade said nothing, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. When he finally looked up, the hardness in his eyes made Rosalie shiver despite the fire's warmth. "Because Holloway killed my brother too. 2 years ago, over a piece of land near the Sweetwater, Frank refused to sell, so Holloway had him branded a rustler." Wade's voice remained steady, but Rosalie could hear the rage simmering beneath his words. "Hanged him from the same tree they used for your father, I expect." Understanding dawned on Rosalie. This wasn't simply about repaying a debt. Wade Blackwood wanted vengeance as badly as she did. "I'm sorry about your brother," she offered, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. Wade acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. I can take a turn, Rosalie insisted. A hint of amusement crossed his face. You planning to shoot me in my sleep with that little derringer? If I wanted you dead, Mr. Blackwood, she said, echoing his earlier words. I would have done it already. This time, his smile reached his eyes. Fair enough, I'll wake you in 4 hours. Rosalie wrapped herself in the blanket he offered, using her saddle as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as her mind replayed the events of the day. Wade Blackwood remained an enigma, potentially her greatest ally or her most dangerous enemy. Either way, he was her only hope of bringing Thomas Holloway to justice. When Wade shook her awake what felt like minutes later, the moon had traveled halfway across the sky. Rosalie sat up, momentarily disoriented. Your turn, Wade said, handing her his revolver. Figured you might feel better with something more substantial than that derringer. The gesture surprised her. The Colt was a powerful weapon and a significant display of trust from a man who had every reason to be as wary of her as she was of him. Thank you, she said, accepting the weapon. It was heavier than she expected, the grip worn smooth from years of use. You know how to use it. My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, Rosalie replied, said a woman alone needs to know how to protect herself. Wade nodded approvingly. Smart man. He settled himself against his saddle, hat pulled low over his eyes. Wake me if anything moves that isn't a deer or rabbit. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into the rhythm of sleep, leaving Rosalie alone with her thoughts and the vast, star-filled sky above. She tested the weight of the revolver in her hand, wondering what it said about Wade Blackwood that he would trust her with his weapon while he slept. Perhaps he was simply confident she needed him too much to consider shooting him. Or perhaps, and this thought unsettled her more, he genuinely believed she would come to trust him. The night passed without incident, and they were back in their saddles before dawn, pushing deeper into the mountains. By midday, they had climbed high enough that Rosalie could look back and see the plains stretching out behind them like an ocean of grass. Almost there, Wade announced as they crested a ridge. Below them lay a small valley, sheltered by towering pines and split by a clear mountain stream. Nestled among the trees stood a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney. Your cabin? Rosalie asked, taking in the isolated location. Wade nodded. Built it myself after Frank died, needed somewhere to. He trailed off, but Rosalie understood, somewhere to grieve, somewhere to plan revenge. They descended into the valley, the horses picking their way carefully down the steep trail. As they approached the cabin, Rosalie noted the care with which it had been constructed, solid logs chinked with mud and moss, a roof that looked recently repaired, and a small corral for the horses. It's not much, Wade said as he dismounted, but it's defensible and comfortable enough. Rosalie slid from her saddle, stretching her stiff muscles. How long do you plan for us to stay here? Long enough to work out how we're going to bring down Holloway. Wade led the horses toward the corral. Could be a week, could be longer. The prospect of spending weeks alone in this remote cabin with a man she barely knew should have alarmed Rosalie more than it did. Perhaps she was simply too exhausted to care, or perhaps some instinct told her Wade Blackwood was a man of his word. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor's dwelling. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area nearby. A table and chairs sat in the center of the main room, while a curtained-off section at the back presumably contained a bed. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, and supplies. You'll take the bed, Wade said, setting down their saddlebags. I'll sleep by the fire. Rosalie raised an eyebrow. Chivalry, Mr. Blackwood, common decency, Miss Bennett. He moved to the fireplace, kneeling to arrange kindling. My mother would haunt me if I let a lady sleep on the floor. I'm not sure I qualify as a lady anymore, Rosalie said with a bitter laugh. Ladies don't usually find themselves on the run with prices on their heads. Wade struck a match, the small flame illuminating his face. You'd be surprised what ladies can do when pushed far enough. They fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine over the next few days. Wade hunted and tended to the horses, while Rosalie took charge of the cabin, cooking meals from their provisions and the game Wade brought in. They spent evenings planning, discussing what they knew about Holloway's operations and weaknesses. "He's got 3 main ranches," Wade explained on their third night, sketching a rough map on a piece of paper. "The headquarters is here, outside Cheyenne. That's where your father's land is now. Then he's got holdings near Laramie and another spread up by the Montana border." Rosalie studied the map. "The Cheyenne Ranch will be the most heavily guarded." "Agreed, but it's also where we'll find the evidence we need." Wade tapped the paper. "Holloway keeps records, deeds, receipts, letters to corrupt officials." "My brother mentioned it once, said Holloway was meticulous about documenting his empire." "How would we even get near the place? I'm a wanted woman and you can't exactly walk up to the front door." Wade leaned back in his chair, considering. "We need leverage. Something or someone that would force Holloway to expose himself." "The judge," Rosalie said suddenly. "Judge Wilkins, he's the weak link. Without him, Holloway couldn't have taken our land legally." "You think Wilkins would turn on Holloway?" "No," Rosalie shook her head. "But I think he might have kept evidence as insurance. Men like that always protect themselves." A slow smile spread across Wade's face. "Miss Bennett, I believe you might be onto something." As they plotted and planned, Rosalie found herself gradually lowering her guard around Wade. It wasn't just that they shared a common enemy, there was something about his straightforward manner that inspired confidence. He never made promises he couldn't keep, never sugarcoated the dangers they faced, and never pressed her for more trust than she was willing to give. On the 7th day, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Wade finally asked the question she'd been dreading. "What happened the day they came for your father?" Rosalie stiffened, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. For a moment, she considered deflecting, but the quiet expectation in Wade's eyes demanded honesty. "It was raining," she began, the memories washing over her like the downpour that had soaked her that terrible day. "We'd been expecting trouble." The verdict had come down the day before guilty on all counts. Pa said Holloway's men would come to escort him to Cheyenne for sentencing, but he knew they'd never let him make it to town. Wade remained silent, giving her space to tell the story at her own pace. They arrived just after dawn. 6 of them, led by Holloway's foreman, Curtis. "Pa told me to hide in the root cellar, said he'd handle things." Rosalie's voice grew distant. "I should have known he was saying goodbye." "There was nothing you could have done," Wade said softly. "I heard the shots from the cellar, 3 of them. When everything went quiet, I crept out to look." Rosalie swallowed hard. "They dragged him outside, hanged him from the old oak by the creek, said it was justice for a rustler. And then they burned the house. I managed to grab my father's derringer and a few valuables before escaping through the back. They didn't know about me. Pa had kept me hidden during the trial, sent me to stay with our nearest neighbors. I watched from the hills as they destroyed everything we'd built." Wade's hand came to rest lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that Rosalie found herself leaning into instead of pulling away from. "I've been running ever since," she finished. "Trying to stay ahead of Holloway's men while looking for a way to clear my father's name and bring Holloway to justice. We'll do it together," Wade promised, his voice carrying the weight of an oath. "Holloway will pay for what he's done to your father and to Frank." Rosalie looked up at him, struck by the intensity in his blue eyes. "Why do I almost believe you when you say that?" "Because deep down, Miss Bennett, I think you're starting to trust me." She didn't deny it, couldn't deny it. Somewhere between Silver Creek and this mountain sanctuary, Wade Blackwood had ceased to be a stranger and become something else, an ally, a confidant, perhaps even a friend. "Just don't make me regret it," she whispered. Wade's hand squeezed her shoulder gently before withdrawing. "I'll do my best not to." The next morning brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them a biting wind that promised snow. "Storms coming," Wade observed as they ate breakfast. "Might be the first big one of the season." Rosalie glanced toward the window with concern. "Will it delay our plans?" "Might be a blessing in disguise. Holloway's men won't be expecting anyone to move in this weather." Wade rose from the table, gathering their plates. "But we need to prepare. Could be snowed in for a few days." They spent the day securing the cabin and gathering additional firewood. By mid-afternoon, the first flakes were falling, large and wet, quickly blanketing the ground in white. By nightfall, the storm had intensified into a howling blizzard that rattled the shutters and sent drafts whistling through the cabin. Rosalie sat close to the fire, wrapped in a blanket as she watched Wade check the windows one last time before joining her. "Should hold through the night," he said, pouring them each a small measure of whiskey from a bottle he'd produced from a cabinet. "To ward off the chill," he explained, handing her a cup. The liquor burned pleasantly down Rosalie's throat, spreading warmth through her body. Outside, the wind shrieked like a wounded animal, making the relative safety of the cabin all the more pronounced. "How did you end up here?" she asked, curious about the man who had so unexpectedly become her protector. "After the war, I mean." Wade stretched his long legs toward the fire, considering her question. "Drifted for a while, worked as a ranch hand, tried my hand at prospecting, rode with a cattle drive or two." A shadow crossed his face. "Did some things I'm not proud of." "Like what?" "Hired out my gun a few times." His voice was matter of fact. "Was good at it. Too good, maybe. Started to lose track of who I was becoming." Rosalie studied him in the firelight. "What changed?" "Frank." Wade's expression softened at the mention of his brother. "Found me in a saloon in Denver, half drunk and heading for trouble. Dragged me back to his place in Wyoming, helped me remember there was more to life than anger and regret. You were close. He was the best of us, always had been." Wade took another sip of whiskey. "Married a local girl, had a little boy on the way when Holloway decided he wanted Frank's water rights." Rosalie's heart clenched at the revelation. "What happened to his wife? The child?" "Emily lost the baby after Frank died. Grief, the doctor said." Wade's knuckles whitened around his cup. "She went back east to her family. Last I heard, she remarried." "I'm sorry," Rosalie said again, understanding now the depth of Wade's determination to see Holloway pay. "Frank used to say that the measure of a man isn't in how he handles victory, but in how he faces defeat." Wade's gaze was distant, lost in memory. "I aim to show Holloway what that means." The storm raged through the night and into the next day, confining them to the cabin. They passed the time with conversation and card games, learning each other's stories piece by piece. Rosalie told Wade about her mother, a Boston-born lady who had followed her father west out of love and never regretted it. Wade shared tales of his childhood in Missouri, where he and Frank had grown up on a small farm before the war tore their family apart. By the third day of their confinement, the storm had weakened to occasional flurries, leaving behind nearly 2 feet of snow that transformed the valley into a pristine wonderland. Rosalie stood at the window, watching as Wade cleared a path to the small stable where the horses were sheltered. She found herself admiring the efficiency of his movements, the strength evident in the set of his shoulders as he worked. It was dangerous territory, this growing awareness of Wade Blackwood as more than just an ally in her quest for justice. Dangerous and yet somehow inevitable. When he returned, cheeks ruddy from cold and exertion, Rosalie had coffee waiting. He accepted the cup with a grateful nod, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The brief contact sent a jolt through Rosalie that had nothing to do with the static electricity of the dry winter air. "Horses are fine," Wade reported, removing his gloves and coat. "Trail down to the valley's impassable for now, but the snow will settle in a few days." "So we're still stuck here," Rosalie observed, attempting to keep her tone neutral. Wade's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Is that such a hardship?" "No," she admitted quietly. "It's not." That evening, as they sat before the fire sharing the last of the whiskey, Wade surprised her by asking a question she hadn't anticipated. "What will you do?" "After Holloway, I mean." Rosalie blinked, realizing she hadn't thought beyond her pursuit of justice. "I don't know. Try to get the ranch back, I suppose. It's all I have left of my parents. Running a ranch alone isn't easy. I managed alongside my father for years." There was a defensive edge to her voice that she immediately regretted. Wade held up a hand in a placating gesture. "Didn't mean to imply you couldn't handle it, just that it's a lot for anyone to take on solo." Rosalie sighed, the fight leaving her as quickly as it had come. "You're right. I don't know if I could do it alone, but what choice do I have? There are always choices," Wade said softly. His eyes, reflecting the firelight, held something that made Rosalie's breath catch in her throat. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting from the sudden intensity of the moment. What will you do once Holloway is finished? Wade was quiet for so long that Rosalie thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Been thinking about that more lately. For a long time, vengeance was all I had room for. He set down his empty cup. Now I'm not so sure that's enough anymore. What changed? His gaze found hers again, steady and unwavering. I met a woman who reminded me there might be something worth living for beyond revenge. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Rosalie felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire or the whiskey. Wade, she began, uncertain what she meant to say. He shook his head slightly. You don't need to say anything. I know trust doesn't come easy for you. Shouldn't come easy, considering what you've been through. It's not that I don't trust you, Rosalie said, surprising herself with the truth of it. I do, more than I should, probably. Then what is it? Rosalie struggled to articulate the tangle of emotions within her. I'm afraid, she finally admitted. Afraid of caring for someone and losing them, afraid of what happens after we confront Holloway if we even survive it. Wade moved closer, closing the distance between them on the hearth rug. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Fear's natural, he said quietly. Means you've got something worth protecting. Rosalie leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the warmth of his palm against her skin. When she opened them again, Wade was watching her with an expression that made her heart race. I should have died when they came for my father, she whispered. Sometimes I think I did in a way. The person I was before she's gone. No, Wade's thumb traced the line of her jaw. She's still there, stronger now, tempered by fire like good steel. Before Rosalie could respond, Wade leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it nearly broke her heart. She froze for an instant before responding, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, Rosalie found herself breathless as though she'd been running. Wade's eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of regret or uncertainty. I shouldn't have done that, he said, though he made no move to pull away. Yes, you should have, Rosalie replied, surprising herself with her boldness. And you should do it again. This time when their lips met, there was nothing tentative about it. Rosalie poured years of loneliness and loss into the kiss, taking comfort in the solid strength of Wade's arms as they wrapped around her. For the first time since her father's death, she felt safe, protected not because she was weak, but because Wade understood her strength and respected it. When they finally broke apart, Wade rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. We should stop, he murmured, though his arms tightened around her waist. Why? Rosalie challenged, her fingers threading through his hair. Because I respect you too much to take advantage of this situation. Rosalie pulled back slightly to look him in the eyes. Wade Blackwood, I may have lost everything else, but I still have my mind and my will. If I'm choosing you, it's not because of our circumstances. It's despite them. A slow smile spread across Wade's face. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, Rosalie Bennett. And you, she said, returning his smile, are the first man since my father that I've truly trusted. Later, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, the storm once again raging outside, Rosalie traced the scars that marked Wade's body, testaments to a life lived hard and dangerous. The bullet wound from Westport, a knife scar along his ribs, the mark of a burn on his shoulder. Does it bother you? Wade asked, watching her exploration. The evidence of the life I've led, Rosalie shook her head. These are part of what made you the man you are, the man who saved me in Silver Creek. The man she stopped, the word catching in her throat. Wade's hand came up to cup her face, turning it toward him. The man you what? The man I'm falling in love with, Rosalie admitted, the words both terrifying and liberating. God help me, Wade's kiss was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. I've been falling since the moment you stood up from behind that wagon, covered in dust, and pointing that tiny gun at me like you weren't afraid of anything in this world. They spent 5 more days in the cabin, waiting for the snow to settle enough to make travel possible. 5 days of planning their move against Holloway, interspersed with moments of unexpected joy as they discovered each other. Rosalie found herself laughing for the first time in months, while Wade revealed a gentle playfulness that had been buried beneath years of grief and anger. But reality couldn't be held at bay forever. On the 6th day after the storm, Wade announced that the trail was clear enough to risk the journey down to the valley. "Judge Wilkins lives in Laramie," he said as they packed their few belongings. "We'll head there first, see if we can find the evidence you mentioned." Rosalie nodded, checking the loads in her father's derringer. Wade had given her one of his revolvers as well, insisting she carry both weapons. "What if we don't find anything?" she asked, voicing the doubt that had nagged at her through their planning sessions. Wade secured his rifle in its scabbard. "Then we moved to plan 2. Either way, Holloway's reckoning is coming." They left the cabin at dawn, the horses picking their way carefully down the snow-covered trail. Rosalie looked back once at the place that had become a sanctuary not just from Holloway's men, but from her own despair. Whatever happened next, she knew she had found something in that cabin she had thought lost forever: hope. The journey to Laramie took 3 days, slowed by the need to avoid main roads and towns where Holloway might have men watching. They traveled by day and camped at night, their newfound intimacy adding a sweetness to the hardships of the trail that Rosalie had never expected. On the outskirts of Laramie, they made camp one last time, planning their approach for the morning. "Judge Wilkins has a house on the north side of town," Wade explained, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "Fancy place for a circuit judge. Another sign he's taking money from somewhere." "How do we get to him? He'll recognize me for sure." "We don't need to get to him directly, just into his house." Wade outlined his plan. They would wait until the judge left for the courthouse, then Rosalie would pose as a potential domestic help inquiring about a position while Wade searched the judge's study for evidence. "It's risky," Rosalie pointed out. "If we're caught, we won't be," Wade assured her with more confidence than she felt. "But if something goes wrong, we meet back here and ride for the cabin." "Agreed," Rosalie nodded, though anxiety gnawed at her stomach. The thought of returning to civilization after their idyllic isolation brought home the reality of what they were attempting and the consequences of failure. That night, as they lay beside their small fire, Wade pulled her close against his chest, his chin resting on the top of her head. "I want you to know something," he said, his voice a rumble she could feel through his chest. "No matter what happens tomorrow or the day after, meeting you has changed me, given me something I thought I'd lost." Rosalie tilted her head to look up at him. "What's that?" "A future I can imagine wanting." His arms tightened around her. "One that's about more than just settling scores." "Tell me about this future," she prompted, needing to hear the dream spoken aloud. Wade was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "A place of our own. Not your father's ranch somewhere new, a fresh start, somewhere the past can't find us. Would there be children?" Rosalie asked softly, surprising herself with the question. A smile spread across Wade's face, visible even in the dim firelight. "As many as you want. Boys with your spirit and girls with your eyes. And if I want to help run the ranch, not just keep house, I'd expect nothing less." His hand stroked her hair. "Partners in everything, Rosalie, that's what I want us to be." She pressed a kiss to his jaw, her heart full. "Then let's make sure we live to see it." Morning brought a light snow and the resolve to put their plan into action. They rode into Laramie separately, Wade first, to position himself near the judge's house, and Rosalie an hour later, dressed in her plainest clothes with her hair hidden beneath a simple bonnet. Judge Wilkins's home was indeed impressive for a man on a government salary. A 2-story clapboard structure with ornate trim and a wraparound porch. Rosalie watched from across the street as a portly man in judicial robes emerged, called for his carriage, and departed in the direction of the courthouse. Waiting 15 minutes to ensure he wouldn't return for forgotten papers, Rosalie crossed the street and approached the front door. A thin, severe-looking woman answered her knock. "Yes, what is it?" the woman demanded, looking Rosalie up and down with obvious disdain. "Good morning, madam," Rosalie said, adopting a slight accent and keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. I heard you might be looking for help with the housekeeping. I'm experienced with fine homes. The woman frowned. Who told you we were hiring? Mrs. Peterson at the general store mentioned it when I was inquiring about positions. Rosalie had gambled that a wealthy household would always be in need of staff, and from the woman's hesitation, she guessed correctly. Well, Maggie has been talking about visiting her sister in Denver, the woman muttered, more to herself than to Rosalie. Come in, then. I'll see if you're suitable. Rosalie followed the woman, presumably Mrs. Wilkins, into the house, taking careful note of the layout. A grand staircase dominated the entry hall, with doors leading off to various rooms. Through one open doorway, she glimpsed what appeared to be the judge's study, a book-lined room with a large desk. What's your name, girl? Mrs. Wilkins asked as she led Rosalie toward the back of the house. Mary Smith, madam, Rosalie replied, using the alias she and Wade had agreed upon. Well, Mary, the position would involve cleaning, some laundry, and helping cook with dinner preparations. Mrs. Wilkins pushed open a door to reveal an immaculate kitchen where an older woman was kneading bread dough. This is Cook. She runs the kitchen. The cook looked up, giving Rosalie a brief nod before returning to her work. Mrs. Wilkins continued the tour, showing Rosalie the dining room, sitting room, and laundry facilities. All the while, Rosalie kept her eyes open for Wade, but there was no sign of him. Now, about your references, Mrs. Wilkins said as they returned to the front of the house. I assume you have letters from previous employers. Yes, madam, I have them here. Rosalie reached into her pocket, pretending to search for documents. Oh, I must have left them at my lodgings. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Wilkins's expression hardened. I can't consider you without references. Surely you understand that. Of course, madam. If I could just return with them this afternoon. A sudden crash from upstairs interrupted her. Mrs. Wilkins's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What was that? She demanded. Before Rosalie could respond, the sound of breaking glass came from the direction of the judge's study. Mrs. Wilkins rushed toward the room, Rosalie close behind, her heart pounding with fear for Wade. The study was empty, but the window stood open, curtains billowing in the cold breeze. On the floor lay shattered glass from a paperweight that had fallen from the desk. Someone's been in here, Mrs. Wilkins cried, rushing to the window. Thief, help, thief. Rosalie's eyes darted around the room, noting the open drawers of the desk and a disturbed section of books on one shelf. Wade had clearly been searching, but had he found what they needed? I'll check outside, madam, Rosalie offered, already backing toward the door. Perhaps they're still nearby. Without waiting for a response, she hurried out of the house and down the street, fighting the urge to run. 2 blocks away, in an alley they had designated as a meeting point, she found Wade waiting, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Did you get it? She asked breathlessly. Wade nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. Letters, ledgers, and this. He patted the portfolio. Deeds to at least 6 properties, including your father's ranch, with notes about bribes paid and witnesses intimidated. Relief flooded through Rosalie. So we have proof. Enough to hang Holloway and the judge both. Wade glanced toward the street. But we need to move fast. Won't take long for the law to start looking for us. They retrieved their horses from the livery stable, where they'd left them, and rode out of Laramie as quickly as they dared without drawing attention. Only when they were several miles outside town did they pause to examine their prize more carefully. The portfolio contained everything they had hoped for and more. Detailed records of Holloway's land-grabbing scheme, complete with the names of officials he had bribed, and men he had hired to intimidate or eliminate obstacles. Among the papers was a deed to the Bennett ranch, with margin notes in the judge's handwriting outlining the false charges to be brought against Rosalie's father. This is it, Wade said, his voice tight with emotion. This is what will bring him down. What do we do with it? Rosalie asked, her eyes fixed on her father's name in the judge's precise script. Taking it to the local authorities won't work. Too many are in Holloway's pocket. There's a federal marshal in Cheyenne I trust, man named Harker. Served with him during the war. He's honest to a fault. Wade carefully returned the documents to the portfolio. We get these to him and Holloway's finished. Cheyenne, Rosalie repeated, a shiver running through her that had nothing to do with the cold. That means going right into Holloway's territory. Wade's eyes met hers, understanding the fear behind her words. We don't have to. I can go alone, get these to Harker. You could wait at the cabin. Rosalie shook her head firmly. No, I need to see this through to the end for my father. Pride flashed in Wade's eyes. Then we go together. But we'll need a plan that doesn't involve riding straight into town. They made camp that night in a sheltered ravine, spreading a map between them as they outlined their approach. Cheyenne was 2 days' ride from their current position if they pushed hard. The federal marshal's office was located near the territorial courthouse, in the heart of the town. Holloway will have men watching the main roads, Wade noted, tracing potential routes with his finger. And probably the marshal's office too. What about coming in from the north? Rosalie suggested, through my father's land. Wade considered this. It's risky. That's the last place Holloway would expect you to go, but if we're spotted. I know every inch of that property, Rosalie insisted. There's a creek that runs along the eastern boundary. We could follow it up from the south, stay under cover of the trees. There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles from the main house that only my father and I knew about. You think it's still there? Holloway wouldn't have any reason to find it or tear it down. It was just a place my father used during hunting season. Wade nodded slowly. We could rest there, then make our final approach to town under cover of darkness. They set out at first light, pushing the horses as hard as they dared through terrain that grew increasingly familiar to Rosalie. Each landmark brought back memories, some painful, others bittersweet. This was the land her father had loved, the place where she had grown from a girl into a woman. Seeing it again after months on the run stirred emotions she had tried to bury. By late afternoon of the second day, they reached the creek that marked the eastern boundary of what had once been Bennett land. Rosalie felt a lump form in her throat as they crossed onto the property that should have been her inheritance. You all right? Wade asked softly, noticing her silence. It feels strange, she admitted. Like coming home, except it's not home anymore. Wade reached across the space between their horses to squeeze her hand. We'll make it right. They followed the creek northward, keeping to the cover of the trees. As dusk approached, Rosalie led them to a small clearing where a crude log structure stood, partially hidden by undergrowth. The cabin, she said, relief evident in her voice. It's still here. The interior was dusty but undisturbed, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow cot. Wade checked the chimney while Rosalie swept away the worst of the dust. We can risk a small fire, he decided. It'll be dark soon, and the trees should hide the smoke. As night fell, they sat close together before the tiny fire, the portfolio of evidence resting between them like a talisman. Tomorrow, Wade said, his voice low. We'll set out for town at dawn, reach the marshal's office by mid-morning if all goes well. Rosalie nodded, her mind already racing ahead to what might happen once they presented their evidence. Would Marshal Harker believe them? Would he act immediately, or would bureaucracy slow justice yet again? What are you thinking? Wade asked, reading the concern in her expression. What if it's not enough? She voiced her deepest fear. What if, after everything, Holloway still walks free? Wade's arm slipped around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. Then we take matters into our own hands, but let's give the law a chance first. Rosalie rested her head against his shoulder, taking comfort in his solid presence. I never thought I'd have hope again, she confessed. After my father died, I was just existing, surviving, then you came along. We saved each other, Wade said simply, and tomorrow we finish what we started. They slept fitfully, taking turns keeping watch through the night. Dawn came gray and misty, a fine drizzle falling as they saddled the horses and prepared for the final leg of their journey. Stay close, Wade instructed as they set out. If we get separated for any reason, keep going to the marshal's office. Ask for Harker by name, no one else. Rosalie nodded, tucking the portfolio securely inside her coat. They had decided she should carry the evidence, reasoning that Holloway's men would be looking for Wade rather than a woman. They followed game trails and cattle paths, avoiding the main road into Cheyenne. As the town came into view, they dismounted and led their horses through a stand of trees that would bring them to the outskirts near the livery stable. Almost there, Wade murmured, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Once we're in town, we walk casual, like we belong. No running, no looking over our shoulders. Rosalie took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. I'm ready. They left their horses at the livery with instructions to have them fed and watered, then walked purposefully toward the center of town. Cheyenne had grown since Rosalie had last visited. New buildings lined the main street, and the sidewalks bustled with activity. The courthouse is 3 blocks ahead, Wade said quietly as they moved through the morning crowd. Marshall's office is in the building next to it. They were halfway down the second block when Rosalie felt Wade stiffen beside her. Following his gaze, she saw 3 men emerging from a saloon ahead, men she recognized from the attack in Silver Creek. Holloway's men, she whispered. Wade's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. Keep walking. They haven't seen us yet. But as they drew closer, one of the men glanced in their direction, did a double take, and nudged his companions. All 3 turned to face them, hands dropping to their weapons. Run, Wade ordered, pushing Rosalie toward a side street. Get to Harker, I'll hold them off. I won't leave you. Rosalie protested. You have the evidence. Go. Wade drew his revolver as the first shots rang out, sending pedestrians scattering in panic. Heart pounding, Rosalie darted down the side street, the portfolio clutched to her chest. Behind her, she heard more gunshots and shouting. Every instinct screamed for her to turn back, to help Wade, but she forced herself to keep moving. The evidence was what mattered. It was their only chance to bring Holloway down. She emerged onto a cross street, disoriented for a moment before spotting the courthouse dome ahead. Racing toward it, she nearly collided with a man stepping out of a barber shop. Whoa there, miss, he exclaimed, steadying her with hands on her shoulders. What's the hurry? Rosalie looked up into a weathered face with kind eyes beneath a shock of silver hair. I need Marshall Harker, she gasped. It's urgent. The man's expression sharpened. I'm Harker, and you are Rosalie Bennett. I have evidence against Thomas Holloway, proof of murder, corruption, land theft. She thrust the portfolio toward him. Please, there's shooting. My friend is in trouble. Harker took the portfolio, his gaze assessing her for a brief moment before he nodded. My office. Now, tell me everything on the way. As they hurried toward the marshal's office, Rosalie explained in breathless fragments about her father's murder, the falsified charges, and Wade's discovery of the judge's records. Harker listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. Inside the office, he called to a deputy, Simmons, get Reeves and Taylor, armed. Now, the young deputy leapt to obey as Harker opened the portfolio, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. This is enough, he confirmed, looking up at Rosalie. More than enough. Now, where exactly was this shooting? Before Rosalie could answer, the office door burst open. Wade stumbled in, blood staining his left sleeve. Wade, Rosalie cried, rushing to his side. I'm all right, he assured her, though his face was pale beneath its tan. Bullet just grazed me. Lost Holloway's men in the alley behind the mercantile. His eyes moved to Harker. Marshall, Blackwood, Harker acknowledged with a nod. Been a long time, too long. Wade winced as Rosalie examined his wounded arm. Did you show him? He has the evidence, Rosalie confirmed. He believes us. Harker closed the portfolio with a snap. Holloway's been a thorn in my side for years, but I've never had enough to move against him, until now. He looked toward the door as 3 deputies entered, armed and ready. We're going to arrest Thomas Holloway and Judge Wilkins, right now. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Harker stationed Rosalie and Wade in his office while he and his deputies rode out to Holloway's ranch. A doctor was summoned to treat Wade's wound, a clean graze that required only cleaning and bandaging. You should have come with me, Rosalie scolded as the doctor worked. Not stayed behind to play hero. Wade's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Would you have done any different if our positions were reversed? She couldn't honestly say she would have, and they both knew it. Instead, she leaned forward to press a kiss to his forehead, uncaring of the doctor's raised eyebrows. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Hours passed with agonizing slowness as they waited for news. Late in the afternoon, a commotion outside drew them to the window. Marshal Harker was returning with Thomas Holloway in handcuffs, flanked by armed deputies. Rosalie felt a surge of emotions so powerful her knees nearly buckled. Holloway, the man who had destroyed her family, who had haunted her nightmares for months, looked smaller somehow. Older and diminished without his power to shield him. "It's over," Wade said softly, his good arm around her waist. "He can't hurt anyone else." The following days were a blur of statements and legal proceedings. Judge Wilkins was arrested in Laramie and brought to Cheyenne to face charges alongside Holloway. As news of the arrest spread, other victims came forward: ranchers who had lost land, witnesses who had been threatened into silence, families who had lost loved ones to Holloway's ambition. A circuit judge from Denver was brought in to oversee the proceedings, ensuring impartiality. With the weight of evidence against them, both Holloway and Wilkins were bound over for trial, denied bail due to the severity of their crimes. 1 week after their arrival in Cheyenne, Rosalie stood on the steps of the courthouse beside Marshal Harker, listening as he read a proclamation restoring ownership of her father's ranch to her as the rightful heir. "It's yours again," he said, handing her the deed, the real one this time, with her name written in official script. "Though I understand it may hold difficult memories." Rosalie traced her fingers over the document, emotions warring within her. "Thank you, Marshal. This means more than I can say." Later, as she and Wade walked back to the hotel where they had been staying, she remained quiet, deep in thought. "Having second thoughts?" Wade asked gently. About the ranch, Rosalie shook her head. "Not second thoughts, just realizing that having it back doesn't change what happened there. Doesn't bring my father back." "What do you want to do?" She stopped, turning to face him in the middle of the sidewalk. "Do you remember what you said about a fresh start somewhere new?" Wade nodded, his eyes intent on hers. "I think I'd like that," Rosalie continued. "I can sell the ranch, use the money to buy land elsewhere, somewhere without ghosts." "Wherever you want to go," Wade said, taking her hands in his. "I'll be right beside you, if you'll have me." Rosalie smiled, the first truly untroubled smile in longer than she could remember. "I believe I will, Mr. Blackwood, I believe I will." 3 weeks later, Rosalie stood on a hill overlooking a valley in northern Colorado. Beside her, Wade pointed toward a stretch of land where a creek cut through rolling grassland. "What do you think?" he asked. "Good water, enough timber on the north slope for building, plenty of grazing land." Rosalie took in the view, imagining what it could become: a house there by the stand of cottonwoods, barns and corrals beyond, room for cattle and horses, maybe crops in the fertile bottomland. "It's perfect," she decided, turning to face him. "This is where we'll build our future." Wade's smile warmed her more than the spring sunshine. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that glinted in the light, a simple gold band. "I've been carrying this since Cheyenne," he admitted, waiting for the right moment. Rosalie's breath caught as he took her hand. "Rosalie Bennett, I never expected to find love again, thought that part of me died with Frank, but you brought me back to life." His voice grew husky with emotion. "Will you marry me? Be my partner in everything, just like we talked about?" Tears blurred Rosalie's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Wade Blackwood, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into an embrace that felt like coming home, not to a place, but to a person. To the man who had asked her to trust him when trust seemed impossible, and who had proven worthy of that trust in every way. "I love you," she murmured against his chest. "And I'm not afraid anymore." Wade's lips found hers in a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally parted, he looked down at her with a joy that matched her own. "Well then, Mrs. Blackwood-to-be," he said, "shall we start building that future?" Hand in hand, they walked down the hill toward the land that would become their home. Behind them lay the past with all its pain and loss. Before them stretched a future neither had dared to imagine just months before, a future built on trust, forged in adversity, and illuminated by love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. A year later, Rosalie stood on the porch of their newly completed ranch house, watching as Wade rode in from checking the herd. The setting sun gilded the landscape in gold, casting long shadows across land that had transformed under their care. Fences now marked pastures where cattle grazed. A barn stood ready for the coming winter. Inside the house, A nursery waited for the child Rosalie carried beneath her heart, a daughter, she was certain, though Wade insisted it would be a son. As Wade dismounted and climbed the porch steps, his face lighting up at the sight of her, Rosalie thought of how far they had come. From a woman who couldn't trust, and a man consumed by vengeance, to partners building a life neither had thought possible. "Welcome home," she said, stepping into his embrace. Wade's hand came to rest on the curve of her belly, his touch reverent. "Home," he echoed, the word carrying all the meaning they had given it together. Not just a place, but a feeling, a certainty. A trust that, once broken, had been rebuilt stronger than before. "I was thinking," Rosalie said as they entered the house together, "if it's a girl, we might name her Faith." Wade's smile told her he understood the significance. "Perfect," he agreed, "and if it's a boy?" Rosalie considered for a moment. "Thomas," she decided, surprising them both. As a reminder that even the darkest chapter can lead to something beautiful. Wade pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You are a remarkable woman, Rosalie Blackwood." "And you," she replied, "are the man who taught me to trust again, one day at a time." Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light throughout the home they had built together. And in that moment of perfect contentment, Rosalie knew that the woman who once couldn't trust anyone, and the cowboy who had asked her to start with him, had found something rare and precious, a love strong enough to heal the past and bright enough to illuminate the future, one trusting day at a time.